Hello, BookTube, and this is my video for the first installment for uh, March Mystery Madness. I have to think about that for a second, because I'm doing March of the Mammoth as well. And I read two books this past week by Isaac Asimov. His first sort of non-science fiction mystery. What I read was A Whiff of Death in this ratty paperback form, Sphere, and it was the Sphere was publication was 1970. It actually started its life in 1958, and Asimov wrote this, and it was rejected by Doubleday. He got Avon Paperbacks to publish it. However, he wasn't pleased with two facts: that it was paperback, and that they changed the title from what he wanted, A Whiff of Death, to The Death Dealers. Um, and yeah, it's an odd mystery for me. It is. I'm not an expert in reading mysteries. I've read possibly maybe 200 to 250 mysteries, and a majority of those are probably within the last 10 years for sure. The majority, I would say, close to 200 of them. Now, this here is set at an unnamed university, and there's a death in the chemistry lab. It's a graduate student doing research, and he is found sort of slumped over his workbench underneath a exhaust hood, and he had inhaled a cyanide compound. They look at it as either generally suicide or accidental death. However, his research professor, the deceased research professor, doesn't think it's accidental or well, possibly suicide, but not accidental. It's because he was the student was very meticulous of his samples that he had, and also too, a trained chemist would know the difference between the compounds just by even sticking in the spatula into the bottle and taking out a little bit. They'd know something was wrong just by the feel of it. So he starts investigating a little bit because it's on his patch in a sense. There is a police detective, a Jack. He calls him Jack Doheny, I think it is, who seems to be a little, or at least he appears to be simple, sort of the people, lower class, and uneducated in many ways, and he asks a lot of questions. And he starts to come around to think that it's murder as well, and in his prime suspect is the research professor, that is he's investigating it as well, and he's hoping to get tenure. He's waiting to get tenure. He's been waiting for 10 years. He's got a family. He's got a little daughter and a wife who basically tells him, if you don't get tenure this year, I'm leaving. So he's got these pressures at home, and but he's investigating it, and he's got a lot of suspects. I won't spoil it for you. And it's a bit. I say it's a bit clunky as a mystery. Here, I'll read a small paragraph, and you'll see what I mean. Sulfite addition products and cyanohydrins, hydrazones, phenylhydrazones, and semicarbazones. He paid his usual special attention to the phenylhydrozones in order to lead into the ozone derivatives of the monosaccharides. He was sharply conscious of the fact that organic chemistry was increasingly the handmaiden of biochemistry, and this was one of the numerous places of contact. Yeah, Isaac, you're showing off there. Isaac Asimov graduated from Columbia University with a PhD in chemistry, and he did do research at the Columbia University chemistry labs. But at the time he wrote this, he was on the faculty of Boston University, living in Boston. But most of the characters in here are based or semi-based on some professors and other graduate students that he knew when he was going to school there, going to university. And it kind of flopped when it came out. He After it came out, he was quite excited by it, but he read it on the train, I think, going back home from London. I think from sorry, London, New York to Boston, and he realized it was bad. He thought it was quite bad, but he still wanted it in hardcover. The following year, he was at some kind of He was at a party, and he met Norbert Weiner, who was the cybernetics, sort of father of cybernetics, and he said he thoroughly enjoyed it. He really loved the book. So that sort of puffed Isaac up quite a bit too, and um, and then a year later, an old professor uh, he met in 1960, who he actually sort of modeled the murderer on in here, asked, "How can I get a copy of Death Dealer?" So Isaac eventually sent him one, and it seemed to go around in the university students and that it was quite popular then. They were always it was a game to try to figure out who was who, like who in the book was who in real life, what professor, what student at the time. So so yeah, and it's very short. It's like 160 pages in the Sphere edition. And yeah, like I say, it's the professor that's going around trying to figure things out. He's the sleuth in this, and well, he's got the police inspector breathing down his neck, but the like all the evidence points to the research professor, but he is the cop's gut feeling is that he didn't do it. So he gives him a lot of latitude. And then finally, the research professor tricks gets all the suspects or the top suspects into a room, or the main suspect, and then tricks him into and um, you know showing his guilt. I thought the reason for the murder was a few stages deferred, and it didn't quite hold together for me. But it was interesting, even so. If for I guess an Asimov completist to read, or an oddity, it's worth reading. And he would like to have, Asimov had said in his memoir, in his autobiography, that he would like to have continued. He liked the character of the policeman there, but then Columbo came out, and Columbo was a similar type of cop, and he didn't want to do any more, because then people would point and say, "Oh, you copied Columbo." In actual fact, he did it before. Not that he never said that Columbo was a copy off of his book at all. But when it came to 1968, was it Walker and Company said they would do a reissue in hardcover. So this thrilled Asimov, and hence it was called A Whiff of Death. He was able to put it back. He was able to convince them to put it back to the title he wanted. And he says, it was published, and quote from the autobiography, with quote, a very few minor changes to keep the book from smelling too strongly of the 1950s. So there was some minor changes. I don't know what the changes are because this was the first time I read the book. I've never actually read this before. I've never seen an original edition of the Death Dealer's Avon publication. I assume it would be quite collectible. So Asimov went on to write other mysteries, mostly science fiction, but then he was approached by Ellery Queen magazine to write some short stories, which I'm going to start reading this coming week. But so he put out a collection of 12 stories, and then his publisher Doubleday, specifically Larry Ashmead at Doubleday, his editor, saw a book that was Murder in Frankfurt, basically at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And he thought, well, why can't there be one in the American Book Fair, sort of at the ABA? So the title he approached Asimov with was Murder at the ABA, the American Booksellers Association. And that year, in 1976, yeah, I think it was 1976. Well, it was published in 76, so it might have been 75. It was the 75th year of the ABA, and it was happening, and it's been a long time that it was never in New York City. So his editor says, you go there, you spend the whole 4 days there. It was over Memorial Day weekend, and started on a Sunday, and to get local color. And Asimov, while he was, he had a speaking engagement in Connecticut on the Sunday, but he thought, well, okay, he can get, because then he also, at the ABA, he offered his services to help launch a book for somebody else, and the launch was going to happen at 4:20 p.m. in the afternoon. And he thought he could make it in lots of time, but there was traffic. But he walked in, he got there just on time at 4:20, but he was still late because it was bumped forward. And the reason why that was bumped forward, because an authoress, Elaine Peck, she came down to do an interview in, as Asimov said, a peekaboo dress that was too peekaboo. So they asked her to go back up and change. So then his friend got slipped into that space, so therefore he was too late for it. And he also, on the Monday, I think it was, he met Douglas Fairbanks Jr. there, and he was introduced to Anita Luce, another Hollywood writer and actress. And he was on a panel called Sense versus Nonsense with Carl Sagan. And on the opposite side was the mesmerist or spoon bender, whatever you want to call him, Uri Geller, and Charles Berlitz, who at that point was just published or was publishing his Bermuda Triangle book. So they did that. And this was in June, and the Larry Ashmead said, I need the manuscript by August. And Asimov was, oh, geez, that was a quick turnaround for him, even him. So, but he spent the time there, and he got an idea for the plot. And again, I'm not going to go into too many details, but I like this one. It's a reread for me. It's told in the first person by an author that's going to the ABA book fair, and his name is Darius Just, and he has an appointment for an interview at 4:20. So he's late getting there, and then when he shows up in time for 4:20, he's still too late. This is for the same reason that Asimov was in real life. But they didn't name the author. They just said it was an author, a female author that had too much of a peekaboo dress, so they asked her to change. And then as you're going along, Darius Just, Darius Just, the author, he's short. He's fairly short, and there's jokes all the way through there for his shortness because he's wearing platform shoes. And interestingly, the book was dedicated to Harlan Ellison, who was short and a friend of Asimov. But Darius Just as meets Asimov, so Asimov puts himself into the book as the character, and so they banter back and forth, and then like they're in the bar, I think it is, and Asimov is telling him that his Doubleday has sent him there to get local color. Larry Ashmead wants him to write a book called Murder at the ABA. So he's putting all this stuff in, and he's putting it through his own words for this. But what happens is another author does or dies, and Darius Just is investigating it because he feels guilty that he might have contributed to this guy's death, a friend of his, an up-and-coming, a rising star writer. So you find out as the time goes on that Asimov makes a deal with Darius Just to write the story in the first person as Darius Just, but then Darius Just, the author, has final say and can make some notes and possible changes in the story. So every so often you've got a break in the narrative, and you've got something that like a line by Darius Just saying something against Asimov and something like this, and then Asimov answers it. So they're arguing within the text, within the storyline, and I thought that was clever. I'm sure it's been done before, and so Asimov, makes his jokes with women. He does all this kind of stuff, and he pats himself on the back throughout the book. Darius Just sort of sometimes says something else, but he does meet Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and he meets Anita Luce, and he's on a panel with Carl Sagan. On the opposite side is Uri Geller and Charles Berlitz. So it's all the way through, and he says at the beginning that nobody is, as it's all fictitious. Like Darius Just is fictitious. Well, why did he make him a writer and short, and then dedicate the book to Harlan Ellison? I kind of wonder about that. But I liked the framework. I read it on ebook, an ebook copy, and that's the original hardcover. What it looks like. I just Google searched it, and I do want to get a better copy of this. It'd be nice to have a nice hardback of it too, because I did really enjoy the story, and I liked the banter and the arguing back and forth between them. And he also meets Dan Rather in the story, but he also met Dan Rather, in real life at that ABA as well in New York City. It's the name. The town is unnamed, but you guess that it's New York. The hotel is unnamed because one of the publicity people from the hotel doesn't want him to use the hotel as this, so he says, well, he won't name, he doesn't need to name the hotel and stuff like this. So he's got this little banter going back and forth as well. And it's a little, it's very 70s because like the one guy has, you know, a mustache, and that's a very 70s thing. And you know, no beard, no mustache. I mean, mustache, no beard. And every woman that appears in the story is critiqued by Darius Just because it's in the first person, but we know who's critiquing the women. It's Asimov, you know, and it's all the way through, and repeatedly, you know, critiquing the women as well, on their looks, and their personalities. But despite all that, I found it an enjoyable story and quite clever what he did. As I say, I'm sure there are other mysteries that are like this. I'm not aware of any. I haven't looked for any. If anybody knows any, I'd be curious to know, and just, you know, do sound out in the comments below. But yeah, that's the two mysteries. As I say, well, Darius Just, you know, solves the mystery, and you know, gets the culprit, and he's right that he was murdered rather than, you know, accidental death. But as I say, I'm not going to go into the details of that, because that's the only time that I think spoilers are important, or not to have spoilers is for mysteries. Um, but yeah, so, and then I'm hoping, I'm finding difficulty in the sense of it's slow going reading the ebooks for me. I have 6 more to go, because I have the 6 trap. No, is it Black Widowers to read their collections of short stories. Well, at least the 6th one only has 2 new ones, I think, and there was, um, I think, reprinting of some, and then there was some pastiche ones that were written as well. So I think there might be only 2 new ones in that one. So that'd be nice. But yeah, so that's how far I've got so far with the March Mystery Madness, and yeah, so I'll see you next time, BookTube.